I used to joke that the creepiest thing about my parents' house was the half-finished basement and the way the laundry room door never closed all the way. It was this old split level in a quiet neighborhood with streetlights that flicker like they're on a timer. If you walked past our driveway at night, you'd hear crickets and the highway a mile away. Sometimes a train. Nothing dramatic. The kind of place where the scariest news is always a raccoon knocking over the trash cans. It's where I grew up. And because of that, I thought I was immune to whatever weird vibes a creaky house could throw at me. My parents, though, decided to go to Florida for a week at the end of October to celebrate their anniversary. They asked me to house sit because their usual neighbor had a knee replacement and wasn't moving around much. I said sure, obviously. Free laundry and a bigger fridge than mine. I brought a backpack, my laptop, and my parents' golden retriever, Scout, who was basically a sentient throw pillow with a heartbeat and a tail. It started off fine. The first night I microwaved leftover lasagna, watched a dumb movie, and fell asleep on the couch under the crocheted blanket my mom refuses to throw away, even though it smells like dust and some perfume that doesn't exist anymore. Scout snored next to me. He kicked his paws against my leg like he was chasing something in a dream. The house popped and settled the way it always does when the temperature drops, and I remember thinking it was nice to be back. Safe, even. You know how when you're alone, every sound is a little louder? The ice maker sounded like someone pouring gravel into a metal bowl. The dishwasher sounded like it was trying to swallow itself. But all of that was explainable, and I fell asleep without a problem. The second night I was in the upstairs bathroom brushing my teeth when Scout started whining at the top of the basement stairs. Not barking, whining. The kind of whining he does when he really wants something he can't see or reach. He does it at squirrels up trees, at balls under couches, at my attention if I'm on my phone. I figured maybe I'd left his bone downstairs, so I opened the stairway door and flipped on the basement light. The switch is at the top, and it's always been a little loose, like it's not actually attached to the wall. The light clicked on. It washed over the stairs and made this thin triangle on the concrete floor at the bottom. The basement is L-shaped, laundry on the right. A small room with a broken recliner on the left that my dad calls the workshop because it has a pegboard with 2 screwdrivers and a level. Straight ahead is a door that leads to the crawl space under the family room. We used to play hide and seek down there when we were little until my mom realized we were coming up covered in dust and spider webs and said it was off limits. It has this wooden hatch with a ring handle that never quite sits flat. That's the one sound I always remembered about the house at night. The hatch tapping softly when the furnace kicked on and the air shifted, like a heartbeat through wood. Scout stood at the top of the stairs and wagged his tail, but didn't go down. I went first. He followed, stepping so carefully you could hear each paw pad hit the wood. The basement smelled like detergent and damp cardboard and a little like gasoline because of the mower. I walked around the corner, peeked into the workshop, and then looked at the crawlspace hatch. It was tilted open. Not much. Maybe an inch. Enough to see darkness. Enough to notice that I hadn't been down there. Enough to make the back of my neck prick. I told myself my dad probably forgot to latch it last time he was puttering down there. Or the air pressure did it. Something normal. I'm not a paranoid freak. I walked over and nudged the hatch closed with my foot. It made that wooden clack and settled flat. Scout exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. I laughed at myself, tossed his rope toy across the floor, and rattled a quarter in the dryer to make it start again. White noise. control, like you're the one deciding what sounds exist in a space. But that was the first thing. The second thing happened on the third night. My friend Becca called around 10 to gossip about her coworkers like she does, and after we hung up, I decided to take Scout out one last time. The backyard is fenced, which is convenient because it means you can stand on the deck and let your dog take his sweet time picking a spot in the grass without freezing yourself. There's a motion light over the sliding door, but it only covers the first few feet of deck, and the rest is dark unless the neighbor's floodlight hits it. I slid the door open with that sticky hiss and stepped out. Cold air. That smell of leaves and a hint of chimney smoke from somewhere. Scout trotted down the steps, sniffed the air, and then froze. His whole posture changed in this instant, like a cartoon dog seeing a ghost. Tail went down. Head went up. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He stared at the garden shed in the corner. I followed his gaze. The shed is this prefab thing my dad swears he got at a discount. It has double doors that stick when it rains. One time a raccoon got in there and ate half a bag of birdseed, and we found the bag shredded like it lost a fight with a blender. That was my first guess again. Raccoon, possum, maybe a cat, something alive but normal. I took a step toward the stairs to go see. Before my foot hit the first step, the shed doors rattled. Not like wind. Not a small vibration. They rattled like someone on the inside put their shoulder into it. I swear to you, I'm not dramatic. But I turned around like I was pivoting away from a wild animal. I whistled low for Scout, who did not need to be asked twice, and we went inside. I shut the sliding door and locked it. Then I pulled the curtain closed like that would help. I stood there and listened. Nothing. Just my own heartbeat in my ears, and that refrigerator hum that makes you question what silence even is. I told myself I'd check it in the morning, because again, raccoon, possum, maybe a cat. I texted my parents about it on the family chat like, "Your shed is haunted or full of wildlife." My mom sent back a laughing emoji. My dad texted something about get the flashlight and go be a man, and then sent, "JK because he lives in fear of our group chat canceling him for boomer jokes." I let it be. Scout stared at the curtains for a long time, and then fell asleep like dogs do, with total amnesia for anything that isn't a treat or a walk. The next morning I went out to the shed. The doors were closed. There were scuff marks on the inside edge like something had pushed against them. No chewing, no tracks that I could see in the dirt. And when I opened the doors, it smelled like fertilizer and cold plastic. I poked around with a broom and didn't find anything. I convinced myself the wind had done it. It had been gusty. Fine. The fourth day, I started to feel watched. You know the feeling. It's that pressure like there's another set of lungs in the room with you. I'm not even going to pretend to be the person who brushes that off. I felt it walking through the hallway upstairs from my old bedroom to the bathroom, like I should turn around and say, "Excuse me." I felt it in the kitchen when I opened the fridge and the light made a squeak. I even felt it in the shower, which is the worst place to feel anything. I kept sliding the curtain open like the world outside it would be different each time. It wasn't. Beige tile, blue bath mat, my face in the mirror with a little steam halo like a saint of anxiety. It got worse at night. Scout took to sleeping with his nose pointed at the bedroom door. He'd huff and twitch every time the hallway settled. I kept the TV on because silence was starting to have a shape. I left the lamp on too, the one on the end table that buzzes when it's warmed up. That is how you know I was really on edge. I am religious about turning off lights. My dad says you can tell how stressed I am by how many lights I leave on. He's not wrong. On the 5th night, I woke up at the exact moment I felt someone step onto the creaky part of the hallway floor. If you grew up in a house with wood floors, you know the spot. The one that complains even when you're tiptoeing. It's like a fingerprint. You could be dropped into that house blindfolded and you'd still know when you hit that spot. It made that sound, that shallow groan, and then 3 knocks on the bedroom door. Not loud, not sharp. Like someone was knocking with the side of their knuckles so they wouldn't wake up the whole house. I did not move. I didn't breathe for a second, and then I took the smallest breath you can take without making a sound. Scout didn't bark. He lifted his head so slowly I felt the air move where his ears went up. He stared at the door, his mouth closed. He didn't growl. He didn't make any sound at all. That was somehow worse. I put my hand on the nightstand and slid it until I felt my phone. I didn't look at the screen. I just curled my hand around it. "Hello?" I said. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Politeness drilled into my bones by 1,000 package deliveries and neighbor drop-ins. You knock. I answer. That's the script. The knocks came again. 3. Same pressure. Same rhythm. The creak of the board shifted like someone put their weight on their heels. Then off again. No footsteps, no voice. Just those knocks like punctuation in an empty paragraph. "Who is it?" I asked, which I immediately regretted because it felt like an invitation. Nothing. I slid out of bed. My heart was beating in my throat. I grabbed the lamp chain and left it on. That's the stupidest detail, but it's what I remember. The way the lamp buzzed as I stood up. I don't know why I wanted it on. Light made it worse in a way. Like if you turn on all the lights, you can see more, which might be the opposite of what you need. I walked to the door. Scout pressed his side against my leg. I put my hand on the knob, and just before I turned it, whoever was on the other side knocked again. 3. Patient, polite knocks. I jerked like I'd touched a fence and took my hand off the knob. I don't mind admitting I almost said nope out loud. Instead, I cleared my throat, said, "I'm calling the police," and held my phone up like anyone on the other side could see it through wood. I waited. I thought maybe I'd hear someone run down the hall. Silence. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. It had that daytime look that houses have at night when the shadows don't make sense. Everything was familiar but misprinted. I stepped out and looked left, looked right. The thermostat glowed 317 in pale green. Down the stairs, the living room had that sodium orange spill from the streetlight. Nothing moved. No air, even. The house was as still as a held breath. I stood there long enough to feel stupid. Then I shut the door and put my head on it. That was when I heard the other knock. It came from inside the closet behind me. The sound was muffled by coats and drywall and the full fact of the door between us, but it was the same rhythm. 3. Soft, polite knocks. I yanked the closet open. My hands were shaking so hard the hangers clicked against each other like teeth. The smell hit me with this weird clarity. Old wood, a plastic storage bin, winter coats with that woolly dust smell, the dryer sheet box we keep on the shelf. Everything normal. Everything in its place. No person, no animal, no nothing. The sound of my own blood was so loud that for a second I thought it was a low hum in the walls, I shut the closet and went downstairs and turned on every light in the house. Kitchen, living room, hall, bathroom. Even the lamp in the corner nobody turns on because it makes you feel like you're being interrogated by a cozy owl. I walked through the garage and looked at the door there. Still locked. The deadbolt had that chipped paint pattern you only get from years of being turned by the same hand. I checked the slider in the back. Locked. The back door. Locked. I walked through the rooms like I was the final contestant on a game show where the prize is maybe not getting murdered. Nothing. It took an hour to convince myself to go back upstairs. When I did, I left the hall light on. I shut my bedroom door, but didn't lock it, because I'm not going to trap myself in a room if something really is wrong. Scout didn't go back to sleep. He lay there with his head on his paws and his eyes open. The streetlight changed color outside somewhere, and the ceiling got a little darker. I didn't tell my parents about the knocking. I told Becca the next day on the phone, and she said, "You are living in a Goosebumps book," and told me to buy a baseball bat. I bought a flashlight with a heavy handle and a ridiculous package of batteries, and felt slightly better, because there's something about holding an object with weight that makes you feel like a person again. That afternoon I did the thing I had been putting off. I opened the crawlspace hatch. I grabbed a bandana from the drawer and tied it over my mouth like a bargain bandit. And then I hauled up the wooden hatch using the ring handle. It lifted easily. It always does. The dark under there is different from normal darkness. It's granular. It soaks sound up like a towel. The beam of the new flashlight cut through it and landed on old insulation that looked like cotton candy glued to splintered beams. Dust motes looked like bugs. I lowered myself onto my stomach and slid in, which is a decision I would not make again even if you paid me cash. The space under the family room is about 3 feet high. Dirt floor. You can see the concrete wall like a smooth horizon, and then the guts of the house above you. The heater ducts hang low, and if you bump them with your shoulder, dust shakes loose like a sigh. There are old plastic buckets on one side, a sheet of plywood leaning against a support. My dad told me once that when they bought the house, the foundation had a hairline crack that the inspector called cosmetic, which is a haunted word to use for something that holds the building up. He sealed it with concrete and said it was fine. It was probably fine. This is the way I talk to myself. I crawled. The flashlight was ridiculous bright, but everything still felt far. It smelled like the inside of an old library if the books were made of dirt. My elbow bumped something. I thought it was the plywood. But when I put the light on it, I saw a small stack of things tucked into the angle where the wall meets the house frame. There were 3 objects. A mason jar filled with what looked like gravel. A pair of kids' scissors with blue handles and rusty blades. And a Polaroid. The Polaroid was face down. I stared at it for a while before I picked it up. It had been there long enough that the edge had curled, and the white border was gray with dust. I brushed it off with the side of my hand and turned it over. It was a picture of our living room. It had that Polaroid look like the color was trying to remember itself. You could see the couch and the lamp and the little table with the bowl my mom keeps the mail in. The blinds were partly open, so there was this ladder of light on the carpet. And there, asleep on the couch under the crocheted blanket, was me. From that first night. Head back, mouth slightly open, TV glow on my face. I don't want to be dramatic, but I almost threw up. The bandana was suddenly a bad idea, and I ripped it down and breathed in all that dirt air. I went very still and waited because it felt like the entire earth was about to shift. It didn't. The house above me was quiet and dumb like a sleeping giant. But the photo in my hand was real, and the dust on my skin was real. And something in the crawl space, some person, at some point, had taken a picture of me sleeping. I held onto the flashlight like it could turn into a weapon by sheer force of wanting, and I backed out of the crawl space. I didn't run because there wasn't anywhere to run, but I moved as fast as you can move on your elbows without scraping your entire torso off. When I hit the concrete floor, I tossed the photo onto the dryer like it was hot. I slammed the hatch shut and then put the heaviest thing I could find on top of it, which was a laundry basket full of towels and the paint cans from the workshop. If you ask me why I thought that would help, I don't have an answer for you. Maybe it was ritual. Maybe it was to feel like I was doing anything. I took a picture of the Polaroid with my phone. I texted it to Becca with the words, "Found this under the house." She called me immediately and said 6 sentences in a row, without breathing, about calling the police and moving out and whether I was pranking her. I told her I wasn't. I told her I was going to call the police. Then I didn't, because I had a thought that felt like someone else put it in my head. What if there's a camera in the house, and the person is watching you right now make these decisions? I stood in the kitchen and slowly turned in a circle like the worst ballerina in the world. The house looked exactly how it always looked. I stared at the smoke detector, because of course you hear stories. I pulled a chair under it and popped the cover off. Battery, dust, no camera. I checked the thermostat, the vents, the light fixtures, the slats of the blinds. I checked the weird knot in the wood above the door in the hall that looks like an eye. I checked behind the TV, which means I moved the entertainment center very carefully and found 3 dead flies, an ancient quarter, and a tangle of cords, but nothing else. I checked the bedside lamp and knocked over a water glass and soaked a library book I wasn't actually reading. I checked the bathroom fan and cut my finger on the little metal piece, which made the world go sharp for a second like a filter. I put a Band-Aid on and stared at my own face. I looked tired and stupid and scared. Then the landline rang. I have to explain the landline. My parents keep it for emergencies, though what emergency involves having worse service is beyond me. It's this white cordless phone on a charging base on the kitchen counter. It rings like a bird trapped in a plastic jar. It almost never rings. When it does, it's always a scam, or my aunt who refuses to adapt to the concept of a smartphone. It rang like the house was trying to cough. I looked at it like I had never seen a phone before. It rang again. I picked it up. "Hello?" I said, and I could hear the quaver in it. I had this sensation like I was calling up from a well, and the words weren't going to reach the surface in time. There was a sound at first like a hand accidentally brushing a microphone. Then, very clearly, a voice said, "Hello?" It was my voice. I froze. The sound was wrong because it wasn't a recording. It had that live texture, the little breaths, the throat crackle. I don't know how else to describe it. It sounded like me, 5 inches to the left, calling back at me through a tunnel. "Who is this?" I said, because that's the script. "Who is this?" my voice said back, perfectly overlapped. Not the way an echo delays, but like a person waiting for you at the next line of a script. I hung up. I didn't slam it because the house already felt like it was going to crack. I set the phone down like it was a raw egg. I stood very still and listened. I heard nothing. I heard everything. My ears rang. When the landline rang again, immediately, I backed away from the counter like it might explode. It rang until it didn't. The silence after it stopped was worse. It felt like someone in the other room had just stopped talking and was waiting to see if I moved. I did what every idiot in a scary movie does. I started talking to the empty air, because silence was ruining me. "Okay," I said to the kitchen, to the whole house. "I don't know who you are, but I'm calling the police now." I picked up my cell and dialed 911. I felt like a cop was going to pick up and say no, just to mess with me. Because this whole situation felt made up, like I'd fallen into a story where you half expect the author to pop out of a cabinet and applaud you. The dispatcher answered and my voice fell apart a little. I told her my name and the address, and that there had been someone in the house, or under the house, and that I had found a photograph, and that someone was calling the landline with my voice. The dispatcher was calm in a way that felt like a medication. She asked me if I could get to a safe place. I said I was in the kitchen with the back door and the front door both locked, and that the dog was with me. She told me to stay on the line. She told me officers were on their way. I cried then, but only a little. It was the kind of crying you do when you've been holding something heavy and someone says they'll help. My body took the permission and shook. I watched the front door like that would make the future move faster. I held the landline in my other hand, and the combination was bizarre. Like 2 centuries of technology were huddled together in my palms. The dispatcher asked me questions. Did I see anyone? Did I hear anything besides the knocking? Did I have a camera system? I told her no, yes, no. She told me to stay on the line. She told me the officers were close. She asked me if I felt safe. I said I didn't know. That felt honest and useless at the same time. The landline rang again. I flinched so hard I almost hung up on the dispatcher. She said, "Is that the other phone?" I said yes. She said, "Do not answer it." I said, "Okay." Scout whined like the sound was drilling into his teeth. The landline rang until it stopped. Then there were 3 knocks at the front door. Not the polite knuckles on wood kind this time. These were heavy, like the person's hand was more bone than skin. I told the dispatcher someone was at the door. She said the officers weren't there yet and to not open it. I said, "Okay." I stood 3 rooms away from the door and felt the knocks in my sternum. The knocks stopped. Then I heard them at the back sliding door, sharp against the glass like a bird. Then the side door. Then the hallway wall. The sound traveled, not like footsteps, but like a hand moving along the skin of the house. Knocking. 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 My name came through the vents from nowhere in my own voice. "Hey," it said, conversational, easy. "Hey, let me in." I slid down the cabinets until I was on the floor. I put my hand on Scout's head for something that was alive and soft. He pressed his skull into my palm like it would help. The sirens came like a salvation song. Blue light bled across the blinds. The knocking stopped. Everything stopped. The dispatcher told me the officers were at the door. I stood up on legs that didn't feel like they wanted to be attached to my body anymore. And I opened the door with the chain still on and saw a uniform, and then 2 faces that looked exactly like you want a cop's face to look when you've been through something. They came in and did the whole sweep, guns out, voices low. They smelled like cold air and leather, One of them stayed with me and asked the same questions the dispatcher had. I answered and felt purged by the repetition, like maybe by saying it out loud enough times it would make logical sense. The other officer checked the backyard, the garage, the basement. He called out clear for each room until he got to the crawl space. "Did you put these here?" he asked. I said, "What?" "The paint cans on the hatch," he said. "Yes," I said, suddenly embarrassed in a school kid way. He lifted the hatch and shined his flashlight down. He was down there a while. When he came up, his face looked less like reassurance and more like a tightrope. "There are signs someone's been staying down there," he said. "Food wrappers, a blanket, footprints. We'll dust what we can dust and do a canvas of the neighborhood." He said canvas like the noun, not the fabric. Police talk. I nodded like I spoke his language. He looked at the photo on the counter and then at me. "We'll take that." "Is it recent?" I asked, for some reason thinking if the photo was older, I could put it on some shelf in my brain marked, "That's a thing that happened once." He studied it with his head tilted and then slid it into a plastic bag. "Looks recent to me," he said. "We'll send a unit to do extra patrols tonight." They left me with a paper full of case numbers and things to expect. The house felt different after they were gone. Not better, but clarified. The way the air in a room changes after someone says, "I love you," or "We're moving." It had a fact to it. If there had been doubt before, there wasn't now. Someone had been in the house. If you prefer a rational horror, here you go. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the hallway and the clock and 3 stupid episodes of some cooking show where they tell you a cake can be whimsical, like it's a personality trait. The next morning I called my parents. I didn't want to, but it felt like a necessary confession. My mom went quiet in that way that makes you imagine the paragraphs behind her silence. My dad said he was calling the locksmith, and that he'd have cameras installed, and that he was going to drive back from Florida if I wanted him to. I told him not to. It felt like letting the thing win, whatever it was. I told them I was fine. I wasn't. But I was also stubborn, which sometimes looks like bravery if you squint. The locksmith came and did locksmith things and left the smell of metal and a handful of keys that looked identical but weren't. I called a company about cameras and I scheduled an appointment because this is how adults handle fear now. Subscriptions and cloud storage. That evening I took Scout out back again and stared at the shed until the motion light clicked off. I wondered if the person under the house had ever been in there. The idea landed with a solid thunk in my chest. I kept the sliding door open and held the flashlight. I thought about how I was going to tell this story someday, and how in that telling there would have to be a turn. You know what I mean? A door that actually opens. A shadow that finally shows itself. A scream with a person at the end of it. If this was a movie, this is where someone would do something cinematic, like finding a hidden passage in the shed that leads to a tunnel under the foundation. But it was just a shed. Cobwebs, a cracked terracotta pot, a spider the size of my thumbnail that looked like it could bench press me. Normal. It was around midnight when the house did the thing that made me understand this was more than a person problem. It was raining. The kind of skinny rain that looks like strings from a god. The sound on the roof was nice and made my brain move slower in a way that felt helpful. I was dozing on the couch because sleep near the front door felt smarter. Scout was in a puddle next to me. The TV was on with the volume down and the captions on, and the words "gentle music" kept popping up underneath a commercial, with a family smiling at the sky. The TV flickered, and then shut off. That happens sometimes when there's weather. The room snapped into a darker kind of dark. The digital clock on the cable box went dead. I clicked the lamp. Nothing. Power out. I looked to the kitchen to see if the fridge light was still doing its thing. It wasn't. I stood up and felt that carnival funhouse version of your house that happens in a blackout. It's like a rearranged body you're trying to walk through, 3 knocks on the inside of the living room wall. The sound was wrong immediately. It wasn't knuckles on drywall. It was like someone tapping on the underside of a table you're sitting at. Hollow. Close. Inside. It came from the wall between the living room and the hallway. Then the wall to the kitchen. Then the floor under the couch. A polite rapping like a neighbor asking for sugar from the other side of a thin world. "Stop," I said, out loud and pointless. The house ignored me. The knocks moved like a hand dragging a ring over wood on the other side of the skin of the house. The sound traveled to the front door and knocked there, once, and then I heard the deadbolt turn. It didn't open. It just turned. A 1/4 inch, like a breath. I grabbed the flashlight. I shined it at the door, and the beam caught something like a smear at about shoulder height. It was a handprint. It looked wet. It had the shape of fingers, splayed, almost playful. I took 2 steps without meaning to. The light shook in my hand. The smear was the color of dirty water. I touched it with the tip of my finger and it smelled like earth. Not dirt. Earth. Wet leaves. Worms. That smell that hits you when you dig into a garden and the shovel cuts a line through soil like a word. I backed up. "You need to stop," I said again, like I was telling a dog to drop a sock. The house waited the exact amount of time someone waits to make you think they've listened. Then the landline rang. No power, but the landline was powered by the phone line. Old tech. You learn something every day. I stood there with the flashlight pointed at nothing, and the other hand hovering over the phone like it might bite. It rang until it didn't. The silence afterward was as thick as bread. I picked it up because I am not strong, apparently, and because the waiting had become its own noise. I said nothing. The voice on the other end said nothing. And then, very softly, my voice said, "I can see you." I set the phone down and did not hang up. I put it on the counter with the line still open, like maybe the connection would trap whatever it was, like a bug under a cup. I walked slowly to the hallway, because that was the direction the knocks had traveled last. I shined the flashlight down. Every framed photo on the wall had the glass smeared with those wet handprints in neat lines, as if some careful person had decided each face needed a touch. My high school graduation photo had one right over my face, 5 drips like rain. Behind me, the crawl space hatch banged. Not a little shift. Not that heartbeat tap I remembered. It banged like someone threw their shoulder into it from below. The paint cans jumped on the wood and landed with a metal clink like applause. Then again, the ring handle scraped as if whatever was under there had gripped it and meant to pull it through the wood. "No," I said, which is such a dumb word in the face of a whole phenomena. But it was all I had. No. Scout did the one thing he hadn't done in days. He barked. It wasn't vicious. He is not a vicious dog. It was sharp and scared and had my whole fear in it. He planted his paws and barked at the hatch. The banging stopped. Silence. a second that stretched thin like sugar. The ring handle lifted on its own and then dropped, metal on wood, a polite little clink like a wink. Then a voice from the vent above the couch, my voice again, sighed like it was laughing and said, "I like your dog." I grabbed Scout's collar. I didn't do it because I knew what to do next. I did it because I needed to hold a body that was not mine. I dragged him to the front door. I threw the new deadbolt and the chain. I unlocked both. I flung the door open to dark rain, and the shape of my car, and the world. The outside smelled like wet asphalt and sage. I didn't have my keys. I didn't care. We ran. We ran down the driveway and into the street, which was empty, which made it worse. The house behind me had a square of black where the living room window was. I expected a face. I got nothing. That nothing was huge. It was the mouth of a whale. I went to the neighbor's house, the one with the knee replacement. I pounded on the door and felt like I was going to faint. Lights clicked on inside. Mrs. Powell opened the door wearing a robe like a tent and holding a flashlight that looked like she could land planes with it. Scout barreled past her and lay down on her entry rug like a beached seal. I cried again, in a worse way. She put a hand on my back and said my name in a tone like a lullaby. We sat in her kitchen. I told her the short version because the long version had become a way to drown. She called her son, who is the kind of person who uses the phrase, "come over there right now," and he did. He is a big guy who has opinions about everything, and he took my flashlight and went into my house the way a sane person walks into a haunted house at a carnival. He came back a few minutes later with an expression that said he was going to pretend nothing was wrong to keep me from passing out. "Place is clear," he lied. I could tell he wanted to tell the truth. I could tell the truth was one step away from a whole different kind of night. Power's out on the whole block. Probably messed up the lines. You can stay here until it's back. We did. Mrs. Powell made tea because that's what people do when the world doesn't make sense. Tea like it's a key. I sat on her floral couch with a towel wrapped around Scout because he was damp from the sprint. He put his head on my knee and fell asleep like nothing could possibly matter if a nap was an option. In the morning, the lights were back in the neighborhood, and the sky looked like it hadn't ever held rain. I went home with a dread that had become almost academic, like I was walking into a museum about the worst night of my life. Everything was where it should be, which means nothing was where it should be. The handprints had dried into pale brown maps. The crawlspace hatch had moved 1 inch. The landline was off the hook, the open line making that dead air hiss like a whisper. I hung it up. The camera company was supposed to come that afternoon. I added a locksmith to recheck the locks just for the ritual of it. I thought maybe rituals were the only infrastructure available. The officers came back too because of the call the night before. They did that cop walk where they touch everything with 2 fingers and tilt their heads like dogs hearing a word they know. They told me again that there were signs someone had been living in the crawl space. They found a thin pillow under the plastic sheet. They found wrappers from granola bars my mom buys in a big box from the warehouse store. They found a little glint of a mirror, as if someone had tucked it under a beam to watch, which made me taste metal. They found a very small pile of dirt under a vent that made no sense until you thought about hands. They didn't find a person. They didn't find fingerprints that matched anything in their system. They didn't find a name to attach to what was happening. You can't arrest a sound. You can't handcuff a voice. I slept at Becca's after that. Then at my apartment, I told my parents I was not coming back to their house alone, and they didn't argue because they are not villains in a story. They're just people. They hired a company to seal the crawl space with new hardware. They put in those cameras you can check from your phone. My dad had motion lights put up that make the backyard look like an interrogation scene at midnight. For a while, nothing happened. The house went back to being a house. I wish that was the end. I wish it was just a story about a person living under a house, and how that is a kind of horror. And that's that. That could have been enough. A month later, in my apartment, I woke up to 3 soft knocks on my bedroom door. The thing about trauma is that it builds a vocabulary in your bones. I recognized the rhythm before my brain brought the memory up. My mouth went dry. I reached for my phone and opened the camera app like that would do anything. I live alone. The only person who could have knocked was me, messing with myself in a dream. I told myself that. I told myself it was a neighbor in the hall, and the sound traveled. I told myself it was water in the pipes. I told myself so many things. I sat up slowly, put my feet on the floor, and waited. 3 knocks. Closer. Same gentle tempo. Like someone who has all the time in the world. I stood up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The light from the living room made a rectangle on the carpet like a stage set. The door to the coat closet was closed. I did not touch it. I didn't need to. I could feel the implication of it like a finger trailing along my spine. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The preview said, "Hey." Just that. No punctuation. I stared at it for a long time, then swiped. The message opened. There was one word, then a photo. The word was missed. The photo was a shot of my apartment living room from my bedroom doorway. You could see me, small in the corner of the frame, opening the door. You could see the couch and the crooked candle I never fix. You could see the vent at the top of the wall above the bookshelf. In the corner of the photo, near the vent, there was a shadow shaped like the idea of a person. Not a person. You know how sometimes your brain fills in a thing that might not be there? It looked like that, but harder. Like it had edges. I did the adult thing and called the police again. I told them what I told them before, with the variation of a new address and a different arrangement of shame. They came and walked through my new place and told me I should be careful about what I post online. I showed them I hadn't posted anything with my address, so they pivoted to, "These things happen." They filed a report. Everybody filled in boxes. I changed the locks. Again. I covered the vent in my living room with a metal screen that you can screw into the wall. I started sleeping with white noise on, because at least then, if there were knocks, I could tell myself the whoosh was covering them. I stopped reading stories like the one I'm telling you because I didn't want to learn new vocabulary for fear. Sometimes I still wake up at 3:17, which is dumb and specific and too on the nose to be anything but a bad joke written by the part of my brain that thinks narrative matters. Sometimes I stand in my kitchen and turn in a slow circle and look at light fixtures and smoke detectors and the backs of framed photos. I am learning how to live with the idea that a place can have a memory, and that sometimes the memory will not be yours. I haven't been back to my parents' place alone since then. When I go over for dinner, I bring dessert, and my sense of humor like armor. We all pretend the crawl space is just wood and dust, and the occasional spider with biceps. We talk about weather and books, and the neighbor who insists that leaf blowers are a personality. We pet Scout, who is living his best life not knowing anything. Sometimes my dad will say something like, "Remember when you put all those paint cans on the hatch?" And we all laugh, and the laugh is better than silence. A few weeks ago, my mom handed me a plastic storage bin full of old stuff. High school flyers, a hoodie with the letter of a team I didn't care about, a beat-up binder. At the bottom, there was a little notebook I used to keep dumb sketches in. I flipped through it. On the last page, in my handwriting, there was a list of chores my mom had made for me when I was, 10. It said things like, dust living room, clean bathroom mirror, shake out rug. At the very bottom, someone had added a line in smaller writing. It said, "Be polite. Knock first. No smiley face. No flourish." I don't remember writing it. I don't think I did. When I showed my mom, she said, "That's your handwriting," like it was a verdict. I looked at it until the letters blurred into the idea of an alphabet. I told myself my brain could have put that there because brains are great at stories, and I'm not above scaring myself on purpose. But the part of me that knows rhythms and timings and the way a house sounds when it breathes just looked at that sentence and remembered a hand, somewhere unseen, rapping 3 times on the other side of what you think is solid. Sometimes the world is a person in a crawl space with a blanket and a mirror. Sometimes it is a thing that can learn to sound like you and knows where the creaky board is and how often you wake up and what it smells like when you are afraid. I don't have a moral for you beyond this. If you feel watched, maybe you are. If you hear a knock that feels like a question, you don't have to answer it. One last thing, because it's the part I think about when the apartment is too quiet. On the night I ran to Mrs. Powell's, when I opened the front door and the rain hit me, and I felt the nothingness of that black square of window behind me, I glanced over my shoulder once, just once. The vent above the couch was a darker square within a dark wall. For a second, I swear I saw fingers curl over the edge from the other side. Not a person, not a clear shape, just the idea of fingers, like something was learning how to hold on. I tell myself that's not real. I tell myself the brain is a great liar. I tell myself it's better to be the liar than the thing that believes in knocking. Then, some nights, I get a text from an unknown number that says, "Hey," and I turn my phone face down and put it in a drawer like old correspondence I am done with. I sleep mostly. I dream of basements that open like mouths and sheds that rattle and handprints on glass that don't ever dry. And when I wake up at 3:17, I listen to the white noise and to Scout breathing in my memory and to the apartment making house sounds. And I wait. If the knock comes, I don't answer. I don't say hello. I don't ask who it is. I let the question hang there, like a coat I'm not going to wear. Because polite or not, some doors are meant to stay closed. Look, I'm not the type to blow things out of proportion. I'm the one who tells everyone to chill when a smoke alarm goes off because somebody forgot a pizza in the oven. I grew up in a family that handled weird stuff with bad jokes and a shrug. So when I say this is the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me, I'm not trying to bait you with clickbait energy. I'm just telling you what actually went down. If anything, I'm underselling it. I moved into the house on a Tuesday late summer, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin even after the sun checks out for the day. It's a narrow street at the edge of town, where the sidewalks buckle from old tree roots, and the houses are the kind that were probably charming in the 50s, but now look tired in a way that's not exactly picturesque. I picked it because the rent was decent, and the landlord only asked for first month, not last. I tell myself it had character. Everyone says character when a place is old and a little busted. There was a porch swing with rusted chains and a mailbox that leaned like it was tired of holding bills. And there was a narrow driveway that squeezed between my house and the neighbor's, leading back to a skinny patch of yard with a detached garage that might have been a shed or a chicken coop once. My neighbor's place was basically a mirror image of mine, just flipped. Same steep roof, same sagging gutters. His was more buttoned up, though. No overgrown ivy, no porch junk. The blinds were always perfectly straight. I first saw him when I was sweating through carrying a box of dishes up the steps. He was at his window, the one that faced into the driveway, and he was standing there so still I thought he was a cutout at first. You know those cardboard sports mascots they put in gas stations? It took my brain a second to acknowledge he was breathing. He had that thin, stretched look, like someone had drawn him with a long ruler. Not tall in a dramatic way, just all lines and corners. Pale, dark hair with that midnight blue tint under bright sun. The kind of haircut that either someone very careful gave him, or he did it himself. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. Just looked. When he finally turned, it was sharp, like a bird. Maybe he was shy. Maybe he was socially weird. Fine. I've been the weird neighbor before. After a few hours of lugging furniture and swearing under my breath, I decided to be the friendly new person and bring him a plate of cookies the next day. But that first night, I crashed on the couch with boxes for a coffee table, and a fan pointed at me like a dog with its tongue out. Sometime around 2 or 3, I woke up to this sound that at first I thought was a truck backing up, those long, steady beeps, but it wasn't. It was something electrical, a choppy whine, like a saw, but softer, like someone carving through something dense. It came in spurts. 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off. On, off. I lay there sweating, counting the beats. My brain started tracking it the way you do a leaky faucet. You can't ignore it once you hear it. I told myself it was DIY. Everyone around here was always fixing a porch or building a shelf, but this sounded like it was coming from the neighbor's basement, not his backyard. I drifted in and out of sleep with that sound buzzing like a mosquito behind my ear. Sometime before dawn, it stopped. I woke to silence, and the feeling I'd been listening so hard I'd clenched my jaw all night. The next day I did the cookie thing. Not because I'm Mrs. Rogers, but because I was curious. And curiosity in a new place can be healthy. I knocked on his side door because that's the one right off the driveway that looked more used than the front. It was half glass, textured so you could see light, but not shapes. After a long pause, I heard footsteps come up from what sounded like stairs. He opened the door 6 inches, and cool, bleach-tinted air slipped out. He wore a gray t-shirt and black jeans, both too clean for a guy who'd been using tools at 3 a.m. His eyes were light, gray or blue. I couldn't decide because they didn't hang out on mine long. They flicked between the plate and my face and over my shoulder at my house like he was ticking boxes. "Hey," I said. "I live next door now. Thought I'd say hi." I lifted the plate like a prop. "Cookie truce." He looked at the plate like it was homework. He didn't take it right away, which made me weirdly aware I was holding out a circle of store-brand cookies that got squished during the drive. He finally cracked the door open a bit more, took the plate by the rim, and said, "Are these with nuts?" "I don't think so," I said. "Just chocolate chips. You're not allergic, are you?" "No," he said, eyes flicking to me again, the quickest weather report glance. "I don't like nuts. They're stale in most things." "Noted." I grinned, trying too hard. I almost said a fake name for some reason. I felt a stupid hiccup of caution. I don't know why. "I'm Sam," I said. "Okay," he said. Then, after a heartbeat, like he had to drag the word up from a well, "Daniel." "Cool. If you ever need to borrow a ladder or a cup of sugar," I said, realizing how sitcom that sounded. "I'm around." He gave a slow blink. "You keep your ladder inside?" I laughed, because that's what I do when someone says something off. "In the garage," I said. "Pretty sure it won't sprout legs." He lifted his chin like he was smelling the air, but his face didn't change. "Your garage door doesn't lock," he said. It does," I said. "It should. It's one of those padlock things." "Then it's not locked," he said. "I could lift it with 2 fingers." And that's when my friendliness chilled a couple degrees. There's a difference between helpful and nosy. Between, "Hey, your porch light's on," and "I've tested your locks." I kept my smile because my face knows how to do that. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "I'll check it." He nodded. Not a goodbye nod, just a nod. Then he stepped back and pushed the door closed. I stood there listening. The footsteps went back down the stairs, not like he was embarrassed or rushing, just going back to whatever he'd been doing. The bleach smell lingered in the little shadowed strip between our houses, and I felt this strange impulse to go wash my hands just from being near his doorknob. I went back to my place and, yes, checked the garage. The padlock was on but not snapped shut. Maybe the old tenant had been careless. Maybe Daniel was right and I was an idiot for leaving it. I clicked it closed and tugged twice to make sure. The metal rattled back with a low clunk that echoed too loud in the small yard. That night, the sound started again. Not as constant as the night before, but there, that small electrical whine. I sat on the floor assembling a bookshelf with an Allen wrench, and the rhythm synced up with my brain. It burrowed in. At 10:30 it stopped. Then something thumped against the shared wall. A dull meat-on-lath thud, followed by a sort of dragging sound. I put my ear to the wall, felt the cool plaster, and told myself it was furniture. He was moving a dresser by himself. "Calm down, Sam." Then there was this metallic clink, like a chain touching a hook. I leaned away and told myself to mind my business. The first truly weird thing happened on garbage day. We roll the cans out to the curb at dawn because raccoons in this neighborhood are NFL-level athletes. I went out with mine and saw Daniel's can already there, neat and upright. Except he'd wrapped the lid with 2 layers of duct tape, like a gift from a prison. I don't know why that stuck out so hard, but it did. Everyone else just slaps the lid on and prays. He had made sure it was sealed like he was shipping it. It made me laugh awkwardly at first. Then I remembered the bleach smell and the saw sound, and didn't laugh. About a week in, the smell started. It wasn't constant. It was like the kind of scent that rides a breeze and takes a long time to find what it's made of. Not rotten exactly, not sewage. There was this coppery undertone that made me think of old pennies and the inside of a new can. It would drift in through the kitchen window when I washed dishes and then be gone before I could get angry about it. I bought stronger dish soap. I cleaned the sink trap. I did the thing where you boil vinegar in a pot like a witch. It would vanish, and I'd think I'd fixed it. But then I'd be lying on the couch with a book and feel like a coin had melted on my tongue. I did not immediately leap to the worst conclusion. I have a memory from being a kid where our neighbor's freezer died, and for a full week their whole block smelled like spoiled deer meat. That was the Midwest for you. So when I finally knocked on Daniel's door again, it was because my kitchen had become unlivable, and I wanted to pretend we were two adults who could talk it out. I brought it up gently, expecting defensiveness, maybe an argument. The door opened 6 inches and stayed there, like before, like the door was on a leash. His face looked the same. Hair neat, clean shirt. If he had pores, I couldn't see them. "Hey," I said. "Sorry to bug you again, but I've been getting a smell coming through my kitchen window. It's probably something dumb like my drains." "It's not your drains," he said without a beat, like he'd already rehearsed the reply. "Okay," I said. "Is it coming from your side?" I tried to word it like a question, like, "Is there anything stinky you're dealing with?" I hate how often I try to make other people comfortable even when I'm the one dealing with something unpleasant. "If you've got a freezer that's going bad or something, I can help." "I'm fine," he said. He tilted his head a fraction, that bird move. "It's the drains." "You just said it wasn't." "On your side," he said, like he was clarifying for a child. "It's your sink trap. Pull it and clean it. Don't run the disposal when it's empty. It heats the pipe. That's why you think you smell something." This is where he messed with my head. I had pulled the trap and cleaned it. I had boiled vinegar. I'd done everything. But he spoke with such bored authority that for a second I felt myself nodding along. "Okay," I said, trying not to let my voice show anything. "I'll mess with it again." I swallowed the other thing I wanted to ask. "Why do you know exactly what I'm doing in my kitchen?" As if he heard me thinking it, he said, "Your kitchen window is always open when you're home. I smell what you smell." The phrasing snagged me. I smell what you smell. Not I can smell it too. Not it's bad over here too. He said it like he had synced our noses together. Like what went into me went into him. He blinked slow again. "Close the window," he said. "You let things in." He eased the door back in my face, gentle enough that the latch didn't click until the very end. I stood there a second, and then walked around my side and shut my kitchen window. The apartment got hotter. The smell didn't come back that night, but that could have been luck. Or maybe there was a breeze carrying it other nights and not now. I tried not to spiral. I made pasta and pretended I wasn't hearing the muffled sound of something being dragged downstairs next door. You can live with a lot if you tell yourself the right story. I told myself Daniel was a socially awkward neat freak who did late-night woodwork. Maybe he had a medical condition that made him bleach everything. Maybe he wrapped his garbage because he was a raccoon hater. He wasn't friendly, but he wasn't yelling. He wasn't cranking music at 2 a.m. The weirdness could be quirks. I could be the judgmental one here, roasting a guy for duct tape because I like to be friendly. Whatever. Then the cat went missing. Not my cat. The neighbor on the other side, old guy named Bill, who always wore a fishing hat and called everyone buddy, had this mean ginger cat that patrolled the block like it had HOA authority. The cat would sit on the hoods of cars and dare you to do something about it. I respected his hustle from afar. One evening, Bill knocked on my door holding a black and white flyer he'd clearly printed himself. It had a grainy photo of the cat and big block letters. Missing. $50 reward. Responds to Copper. He kept pressing his finger to the photo, like that would make me remember the cat's face. "Have you seen him?" he asked. "He goes out. He always comes back by dinner." He didn't. It's been 2 days. I hadn't seen Copper in a day or two. I shrugged it off as cat business, but Bill's eyes were wet at the corners in a way that made any jokes die in my throat. I took a flyer and told him I'd keep an eye out. Later, I stuck it to my fridge with one of those weak magnets that come on pizza coupons. The next night, while taking out my trash, I noticed something dark under the hedge that separates the two backyards. I leaned in, heart starting a nervous drum. It wasn't the cat. It was a collar, a snap band with a little bell, half buried in the dirt, as if something had kicked it there. No hair, no scratches, just a collar. I picked it up with 2 fingers like it might burn me and saw a tiny tag. COPPER, Bill's phone number. Before I could decide whether to bring it to him or pretend I hadn't found it because I didn't want to make him sad, a light snapped on in Daniel's back room. It was one of those harsh LED bulbs that makes the air feel colder. His blind was up halfway, and for a second I saw his silhouette cross the window, something long in his hands. A broom? A mop handle? He paused as if listening, then moved out of frame. My skin prickled with that weird animal brain feeling that I was being watched even when logic said I wasn't. I stuck the collar in my pocket and went inside. I washed my hands for too long. I did take the collar to Bill the next morning. He cried, like openly cried on his porch, and gripped the collar in both hands like it might transform if he squeezed. I felt like a monster for handing it to him. "Can I ask where you found it?" he said, trying to sound casual and failing. I told him in the hedge, between our places. He nodded. He looked toward Daniel's house and then away, guilty like the thought had just jumped in his head. "I don't want to accuse anyone," he said. "It's a collar. It could have snagged on a branch. Copper's done that before. He hates collars." "Yeah," I said. "My old roommate's cat used to act like a collar was a noose." I was trying to co-sign the logic so hard I almost convinced myself. Bill folded the collar and put it in his pocket like a medal he didn't want to wear. When I left him on his steps, he put his fishing hat over his face and sat very still. That night, I dreamed I was looking in Daniel's window, and he was looking back from inches away, separated only by glass. His eyes were the color of dishwater. He smiled very slowly without showing his teeth. I woke to the sound of the electrical whine again. It stopped, started, stopped. A steady engine. I lay in the dark and counted the seconds, and somewhere past 50 my brain started filling in the breaks with phantom noises, and every phantom noise was a saw taking little bites. I should have told someone, a friend, my sister, anyone. But it felt stupid to call and say, "Hey, my neighbor wraps his trash too carefully and looks at me weird." And also his house smells like a melted penny sometimes. You hear that out loud and it sounds like a paranoid monologue. I told myself to be normal, to be the chill person, to give him the benefit of the doubt. About 2 weeks after I moved in, a package showed up on my porch with his name on it. I don't know if the mail carrier got lazy or just mixed up the steps, but there it was. Brown cardboard, heavy for its size, no logos, just a packing label with Daniel printed cleanly and my address wrong by 1 digit. Not a big deal. People bring me their wrong mail all the time. I thought about putting it on his porch, but the box had clearly leaked something. Not liquid. The cardboard was scuffed and had a weird white powder on one corner. I didn't want whatever that was near my face, so I knocked on his side door and leaned the box against my shin. He answered like always. 6 inches, bleach air. His eyes went to the box before me. "That's mine," he said. "Yeah," I said, lifting it off my leg. Mail got confused. He didn't reach for it. He just looked, and the feeling that I was holding something that had rules attached to it sank in. "Can you put it inside the door?" he asked. "What?" "I don't want to set it down." "You want me to put it in your house?" "It'll land wrong if I do it one-handed," he said. "Please, just inside. I'll get it." I don't know how to explain the alarm bells that went off in my chest then. They didn't scream run. They just started ringing a steady warning, like a school bell that means move. But I'm me. I don't like to make a fuss. So instead of saying no, I said, "Okay," and nudged it past the threshold with my foot. The box scraped over the mat and slid onto his spotless floor. I didn't cross the threshold with my body. The line of the door frame felt like a barrier I should keep. "Thanks," he said. And by the time he said the K, the door was closing again. That night, the smell in my kitchen was back and stronger. I closed the window. I turned my fan to circulate the air. Then I heard a noise I hadn't heard before. Not the saw, not the thuds. It was a whistle. Not a person whistle. Not music. It was that tiny hiss you get when you open a cooler full of ice and something about the suction wants back in. The back of my neck tightened. I turned the sink on, because we do weird tiny things to pretend sounds don't exist. I stood there just watching water go down the drain and thinking how dumb it is that a hole in a house is supposed to take your dirty things away. It feels like something could just come up it if it wanted to. The next morning, a different flyer was on my porch. Not from Bill. A generic missing person flyer printed off a police template, photocopied so many times the face was more smudge than features. A woman in her 20s. Dark hair. Name and last seen date. The date was 3 nights earlier. The flyer was unhelpful, like most flyers are. If you'd asked me what she looked like, I'd say, average. The kind of face that's easy to miss if you don't know it. But you notice when faces start showing up on paper in your neighborhood. Even if it's not your face, it sticks. I put the flyer on the counter and thought about the box. I thought about the saw. I told myself to stop thinking in hashtags. That evening, as I pulled into the driveway, Daniel was already outside. That was new. He stood by his side door with a roll of contractor bags under his arm, talking to a guy by a pickup I didn't recognize. The guy had that "I'm only here for 15 minutes" posture, 1 foot on the ground, 1 hand on the door handle, ready to bail. They both looked at me as I got out of my car. The guy gave a tight nod. Daniel didn't. He just watched like he was waiting to see if I did something. I went inside and locked the door with a soft click I wished sounded louder. Probably I was just being a weirdo about the guy with the truck. Maybe it was a Craigslist pickup. People flip furniture. People sell equipment. People get stuff hauled. But my stomach did a slow roll. I went upstairs and looked out the back window through the gap in the curtains. The guy by the truck lifted a large rectangular thing out of the bed. Too long for a cooler, too big for a toolkit. The two of them carried it toward the basement bulkhead doors behind Daniel's house. I couldn't see what it was because the angle hid it. The way they moved made it look heavy. They half slid it down. Something metal clanged softly, deadened by being wrapped. The guy left after that. Didn't even shut his door all the way before he started the engine. Daniel watched him go, then walked around the side of the house slowly, like a cat that doesn't rush for anybody. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay flat and listened to my own breathing and the gentle rise, fall, rise of the whine next door. I kept checking my phone like a life raft. I scrolled dumb videos so the sound would be less lonely. At one point, around 1 a.m, I heard a soft knock. I thought I imagined it. Then it came again. Not on the front, on the back door. 3 little knocks like someone who didn't want to bother me. I padded downstairs, every floorboard telling on me, and stopped before the door. The blind over the glass was down, but there were those tiny holes all blinds have, and through them, I saw a slice of pale shape that could have been a shirt. I don't know what made me do it, but instead of opening the door, I said, "Who is it?" Silence. Then Daniel's voice, too close. "You left your trunk open." I closed my eyes. "What?" "In your car," he said. I could see in the window. "Your trunk is open." I hadn't opened my trunk. I hadn't been in my car since dinner. I tried to be casual. "Thanks," I said. "I'll check it in the morning." "No," he said, like I'd just broken a rule I didn't know existed. "Now." "I'm in bed." "Now," he repeated, and the word didn't change volume, but it landed different, heavier. "You have to close it." I didn't know whether to be scared or mad. Both feelings were fighting in a way that made my hands shake. "I'll do it," I said. "You don't have to." But before I could finish, I watched the shape on the other side of the blind move, like he'd stepped closer, like his forehead might be inches from the glass. I couldn't tell what he was doing, but his breath made a very soft fog on the tiny window gap I could see. I wanted to throw up. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice level. "You're on my step. You need to go." No sound, just that breath ghosting again. Then the shadow pivoted away, slow, footsteps on wood. My heartbeat smacked my sternum so hard it felt like the skeleton version of knocking. I stood there listening until it was too quiet to stand, then grabbed my keys. Because here's the thing. If he was telling the truth and my trunk was open, he'd just shown me he was watching my car after dark. If it wasn't open, he was trying to get me outside. Either way, not good. But my brain has this stubborn need to verify. I opened the front instead of the back and went around the porch, staying in the little shadows my own house made. My car sat under the streetlight like always. The trunk was closed, perfectly shut. I pressed the key fob anyway. It thunked. I stood there longer than necessary just to be sure of what my eyes were telling me. From the corner of my vision, in the little dark mouth of the driveway between our houses, there was the pale slice of Daniel's face, just there, watching. He didn't move when I looked directly at him. He didn't even pretend to be doing something else. He just stood where the porch light faded. That tight body language wound like a wire. I didn't say anything. I just went inside and locked everything I could lock. I turned the music on in the living room and sat on the floor with my back against the couch, like a kid hiding from a storm under the stairs. The song ended. The house creaked. My phone buzzed with a spam email about refinancing, and I flinched like someone had slapped me. The next day, I bought a motion sensor camera. Not some fancy security system, just one of those little white cylinders you can stick on a shelf that texts your phone if it sees movement. I put it in the front window and set it to point at my porch. It wasn't my style to watch people, but my style had clearly been not working. I told myself it was just an extra set of eyes in case packages got stolen. I didn't put one in the back. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to be the person who had footage I didn't know what to do with. The camera paid off in a small way first. It caught the mail carrier putting a package on my porch and then knocking once. This would be boring, except the motion alert showed me something else too. Around midnight, someone walked across my lawn and up my steps. Not all the way, just one step up, then lean. The camera wasn't amazing in the dark. It made people into gray smears. But even in gray smear, I could tell it was Daniel. He had a distinct way of holding his head, chin slightly forward like he was listening to a bad radio. He reached toward my door, not to knock, not to try the handle. He touched the wood, fingertips grazing near the deadbolt, and held his hand there. He stood like that for 10 seconds. Then he turned and left. I didn't sleep for more than an hour at a time after that. I started using the shower radio like white noise every night. I stopped cooking because the smell of anything in the kitchen made me think of other smells. I ate crackers standing up. At work, I caught myself staring at the word Thursday in an email like it had a secret message hidden in it. I started carrying my keys in my pocket at home. Every faint sound had a name: footstep, creak, thud. And I became an expert at telling them apart. When the police came the first time, it wasn't because of me. They were doing a door-to-door, handing out a flyer with the same missing woman I'd seen. They were polite in that sad, practiced way, where their voices tried to be soft, and how they held the paper was careful, like the rectangle of ink could break. I took the flyer and said I hadn't seen her, and one of them, a woman with her hair scraped back in a tight bun, asked in that neutral voice they have, "Have you noticed anything unusual in the neighborhood? Any strange cars? Someone who's been around that isn't usually." I could have told her everything. The saw, the smells, the wrapped trash, the guy who watched my car at night. But suddenly it all sounded like gossip. It sounded like, my neighbor gives me bad vibes. And I could see her face do that thing people's faces do when they listen to someone who's anxious. Kind. Distant. I don't know why it felt embarrassing. It did. So I said, "There's a guy next door who keeps to himself. But he's lived here longer than me. I don't know his schedule." "Okay," she said. She handed me a card. "If you think of anything." "I'll call," I said. I put the card on the fridge next to the missing cat flyer, and the magnet barely held both. I told myself I'd call if I heard something concrete, not sounds through walls. That night it rained. Not a heavy flood, just a steady drizzle that made the porch smell like wet wood and cut the usual noise. The sound from Daniel's place still came through, but it was softer, swallowed by rain. I almost convinced myself that the water was washing the weird out of the air. I fell asleep on the couch for the first time in days. At 3, I woke to a bang. Not the usual thud, not a pipe. A sharp, hollow bang like someone had hit my back door with an open palm. Instinct had me off the couch before my brain caught up. I stood in the kitchen in the dark, sweaty, listening, holding my breath like a kid hiding behind a curtain. Another bang. Then a voice I didn't recognize, muffled, hoarse, too close. "Hey, hey." A scrape on the wood like nails. "Hey." I went to the door and put my eye to the hole. The porch light had gone out, and in the fisheye everything was stretched weird. But there was a face, not Daniel's, a woman, hair plastered by rain, eyes enormous in that lens, mouth moving. "Please," she said. It came thin through the door. "Please, help me." For a second I thought I was dreaming, because that's not a thing that happens. People do not show up at your door in the middle of the night saying please like a movie. I unlocked the chain. I opened the door 2 inches, the same cautious way Daniel always did, and the smell that came in wasn't bleach or pennies. It was wet and earthy and human. The woman looked younger up close, but that was just the way fear makes faces look smooth like a mask. She was shaking, standing still. I tried to see behind her, but the darkness was complete. "Are you okay?" I asked. "No," she said, and then looked at the driveway, down toward Daniel's side, like a magnet tugged her eyes. Her voice broke. "He's in the yard." "Who?" She swallowed. Her teeth clicked together audibly. "The man who lives next to you," she said. She said it like she had to force herself not to say his name, like saying it might call him. "He let me out and then changed his mind." I want to say I did the heroic thing, but I just stood there half behind a door while a person on my porch blinked rain out of her eyes and shook like a cornered animal. I moved like my joints were gummy. "Come inside," I said, automatic, because that's what you say. As soon as I swung the door wider, something moved in my peripheral. Not footsteps, not a silhouette, just that low hum of air you feel when someone else's body is close. I yanked her in and slammed the door. The chain swung wild and clacked against the wood. I locked it. I turned the deadbolt. My heart was everywhere at once. The woman leaned against my fridge and slid down it like her bones had been cut. The missing person flyer and the cop's card fluttered to the floor and stuck to one bare knee. Her feet were filthy. She wore a t-shirt that was more threads than shirt, and shorts that looked like they had been cut in a hurry. There were marks around her right ankle that could have been from tape or rope or just living rough. She put her hand over her mouth and laughed once. This broken glass sound that wasn't laughter. "Thank you," she said into her palm. "Who are you?" I asked, which is a dumb question, but it was all my brain had. I crouched so I wasn't towering over her. "Do you need an ambulance? Are you hurt?" She shook her head hard enough water shot off her hair. "He'll hear," she whispered. Don't call yet." There are certain sentences that turn your body into a live wire. He'll hear, not might, will. The word yet hung in my kitchen like a spider. "We should call the police," I said, keeping my voice low. "You don't have to talk if you don't want. Just, they'll come." "He has a scanner," she whispered, eyes darting to the back window like it was a person. "He listens. He always listens." From outside, the rain had thinned to a whisper. Under it, a softer sound. A footstep on wet grass sounds different from a footstep on dry. It makes a little slump. You can't mistake it once you know it. That sound moved in the yard behind my house. Another step, closer to the porch. The woman in my kitchen looked at me, and I saw something shift in her face. She was about to bolt. "Don't," I said, and reached out like I could hold her there by the air. "There's a part of you that wants to lie, that wants to tell someone you've got it, that you can shield them." I wanted to say I was good at this, that the locks were enough, but I heard the back gate creak. The woman grabbed my wrist hard, her fingers silvery cold. "He'll go around," she whispered. "He always checks the front next." If you've ever felt your house reorient itself around you, you know how disorienting it is. Suddenly, I wasn't in my kitchen. I was in a diagram of my kitchen, with vectors and lines pointing to doors, windows, and locks in my mind. I took her hand and pulled her down the short hall to the living room, which had the front door and a big window. The curtain was open 2 inches because I always leave it like that to let light in, and my camera on the sill glowed a tiny dot. Outside, the street looked clean and empty, wet and quiet. On the edge of the porch, a shadow moved. The shadow was Daniel. He didn't step fully into view. He hovered at the edge, the way you pause when you're trying not to get your shoes muddy. His head was turned, ears to the street, like he was making sure no one was awake. Then he looked at my door. He didn't reach for it this time. He leaned in and just pressed his ear to the wood. He stood like that, listening, for a long 3 seconds. The woman next to me pressed herself against the wall and held her breath so hard I could hear her ribs creak. I put my hand over my mouth and felt the hot damp of my own skin. The only thing between his ear and our faces was wood and paint. I was an inch away from stepping back and making the floor cry out under my foot. He moved his head like he was smelling through the door. He didn't speak. He didn't knock. He just listened. Then he stepped back and stood there, looking straight at the peephole as if he could see through it, and lifted his hand. He held it in the air at chest height, palm facing us, like a teacher waiting for a classroom to quiet down. And then he made a small fist and knocked once. Software. The woman shut her eyes, and a tear found its way along a new path down her cheek. I didn't move. Neither did he. He waited. Another small knock. Then he lowered his hand, turned, and walked down the steps. He didn't go back along the driveway. He went into the yard and slipped into the dark between the side of the house and the bush, the same way water finds the lowest point. I didn't breathe until the woman slumped again, and even then I inhaled like I was being sneaky about it. "Okay," I said, voice shaking, more to myself than to her. "He's gone." She shook her head once. "He's never gone," she said. "He's just somewhere you can't see him yet." I wanted to ask 100 questions, but the beast pacing in my chest calmed just enough that I could hear my phone like a live thing in my pocket. I pulled it out and opened the keypad without thinking about the scanner, without thinking about how sound travels in old houses. I didn't dial loudly. I pressed and kept the phone against my leg so the little beeps wouldn't be snitching. When it connected, I kept my voice so low it felt stupid. I said my address. I said there was someone in my house who said she'd been hurt, and there was someone outside who wouldn't leave. I expected the operator to ask me to repeat everything, to say it louder, to confirm 10 times. She didn't. She asked, calm but clipped, "Are you safe right now? Are your doors locked?" "Yes," I breathed. "Stay inside," she said. "Don't engage. Officers are en route." People talk about time slowing down when you're scared, and that's true. But it also speeds up in weird little flips, like you keep losing a second and picking it back up. The woman, she hadn't told me her name, kept her eyes on the floor like it might try to trick her. She started to shake hard, and the shake turned into a little rocking motion. "He lets them think they're getting away," she whispered to herself, to her bones. "He likes the last moment when they look back." I barely processed that. I think my brain saved that sentence for later because it didn't have space. I tried to listen for anything outside, but all the sounds were inside me. My own pulse. The tiny hitch of the woman's breath when she counted under it. I told her my name. I said it carefully, because the idea of saying names suddenly felt like leaving fingerprints on the air. She nodded once like she was filing my name in a locked box. I asked hers. She swallowed and said, "Leah." The name sat between us like something valuable we hadn't earned. A car went by and my heart tried to climb out. It wasn't the police. It was someone who didn't know our little world had tilted. The woman flinched anyway. I wanted to put a blanket over her, but the thought of moving away from the door felt like slacking at a guard post. I stood with my ear tilted to the wood like Daniel had done, and I hated myself for giving him that image. When the police lights finally smeared color across the curtains, the relief was so immediate my knees forgot how to do their job. I unlocked the door and cracked it and called out like the operator told me. "Police?" They answered with the exact cadence that always sounds at once soothing and all business. They moved in with a quickness that made me and Leah both step back. 2 officers in the front, one moving around back to the yard. The one with the bun had the same careful voice as before. People who don't know that tone think it's cold. It's not. It's straight lines when you really need them. Leah didn't want an ambulance, but the officers didn't give her an option. I could see the checklist moving in their eyes. Shock, dehydration, possible injuries. They wrapped her in a foil blanket that made her look like a crinkly ghost and asked me questions in the door, while the other one with a flashlight flicked the beam along my porch like a paintbrush. I told them everything I could, quickly, without editorializing. And even as I was saying it out loud, I heard how bad it sounded. Not bad like I was being dramatic, but bad like a pattern you don't want to see. The saw, the smells, the wrapped trash, the way he watched my door. The woman's whole body flinched when I said his name out loud. I said where he lived. The officers exchanged a look that wasn't casual. Then the radio on the female officer's shoulder crackled, and a voice said something I didn't catch. She looked at the partner. He nodded. She turned to me. "We're going to check on your neighbor," she said. I can't explain why I said, "Do you want me to come?" It wasn't bravery. It wasn't curiosity. It was that wrong instinct again, to make myself useful when I was terrified. She shook her head with a little flick that meant no way in hell. "Please stay here," she said, and then softer, "We'll be back." They walked the few steps to the side door, and in the weird hush of post-fear, your hearing gets sharp. I heard the scrape of boots on the concrete step, the knock that sounded more confident than any knock belongs to be at 2 a.m. "Police," the male officer said. "Open up." There was a beat. They listened the way I had been listening. I don't know if anyone has told you this, but you can hear a room being empty when you've been in houses as long as I have. The silence had a certain flatness, and yet there's that other thing. Houses breathe, and Daniel's house was holding its breath. They knocked again. "Police." Another beat. The officer tried the handle. Locked. There was a moment where you could feel the pivot, the decision that changed the rules. "We're making entry," the officer said into his radio. They didn't wait for a response. The door had a deadbolt just like mine and something low, probably a chain or a second lock, and it didn't look like much. With a metal wedge, they popped in the jamb, and one hard shove to the spot right under the deadbolt. The wood around the plate splintered with a pop, and the door gave. The smell that swung out hit me on my porch. Bleach. Penny. Under it, something complicated. I didn't mean to go closer. My body moved anyway. The first officer held a hand out, palm out, a traffic cop for civilians. I nodded and froze. They went in with flashlights as if the dark was trying to keep them out. Rooms in those old houses are tight, and the light touched too much at once. The neat shoes lined like soldiers on a mat, the spotless floor, the wall with a set of hooks that had nothing hanging from them. They cleared the tiny kitchen, the living room, the front hall, calling police in a way that makes you feel like the word is a broom. The basement door was closed. A too-clean padlock hung from the hasp, snapped through a hastily installed latch like a necklace. The officer with the bun lifted it, looked at the brand, handed it to her partner. "New," she said, just the one word, and the hair on my arms lifted, because I realized I'd seen that exact type of lock hanging off Daniel's garbage can lid. It snapped the same way. The male officer went down the steps first after cutting the lock, flashlight cutting a clean stripe in the dark. Basements in these houses are not the stone crypts you picture. They're poured concrete from a 60s upgrade, too bright when lit, and the kind of cold that sticks to your ankles. The smell down there made my eyes water even from the top steps. Bleach? Yes, but something under it that was trying hard to be erased. The beam moved across a workbench that looked like a dentist's nightmare. Little tools and trays. Label maker labels on drawers with tidy words like twine and clamps and poly. A mini chest freezer in the corner with a lock through the handle like it was a teenager's diary. A tarp neatly folded under the bench. No splotches. The officer's beam paused on a chest-high set of shelves that had brown paper packages tied with plastic twine. Different sizes. All with the same neat labels on white strips. Numbers. Dates. I felt my throat narrow. I thought I might start crying and couldn't identify why. The female officer's radio crackled again with a voice I couldn't hear. Her jaw tightened a notch. She moved carefully, like every square foot mattered. Along one wall was a pegboard with hooks bearing. Things that had a nice version in a kitchen. Meat hooks. A bone saw like a band with a handle. There was no blood. I think I expected a horror version of a butcher. This was worse. It was so clean. Clean like a new appliance showroom. Clean like scrubbing was a hobby. Clean like cleaning was the point. "Sir," The officer's voice floated up, cautious but steady. "We're going to need to call this in." Another beat. "We found something." He didn't say what. He didn't have to. The silence under the words grew teeth. They opened the chest freezer with a clack of that little lock giving up. There's a sound when you open a cold, damp thing with a seal that has been undisturbed. It's that cooler sound again. A little sigh. The male officer leaned in, and his flashlight disappeared for a second like someone had swallowed it. He didn't say, "Oh my God." He didn't say anything. He backed up. He didn't turn his head toward me, but his beam drifted and reflected off the ceiling in a way that suggested he was seeing too much of the room, and none of it at once. "Call it," the female officer said, and something about the way she said it made me think of doctors on TV. Not dramatic. Final. More cars came. The house looked like a stage with different scenes of brightness and darkness. Leah sat on my couch, curled in the foil blanket like a baked potato, and an EMT crouched and talked to her quietly, while not touching unless she wanted to be touched. I stood in my doorway and watched strangers move in and out of my neighbor's house with that purposeful quiet that means everything is very, very bad. The lieutenant, or whatever rank he was, came by my door and asked me a few calm, direct questions. My answers were short. They didn't need my ideas. They needed what I knew. It wasn't much. The timeline, the smells, the knocks, the package, the night in the rain. They brought Daniel out around 5 a.m, not in cuffs at first. He walked between two officers like an usher, showing him to his seat. He had changed shirts. This one was also gray. He didn't look at me, but I felt him do a kind of scan of the block. A little survey he tucked into his jacket like a folded note. Porch light here. Loose board there. Blind twisted this way here. When he finally made eye contact with me, it wasn't the look of someone whose life is exploding. It was curious, mild, like he was taking note of what I looked like when I watched. His eyebrows flicked once, the tiniest nod. Not a hello. Not a "we're in this together." A simple acknowledgement. You. After that, things turned into a movie I didn't want to be an extra in. Tape went up. People in jackets with letters on the back went in and out. Someone put paper booties over their shoes and carried paper bags out with both hands as if they were made of glass. Neighbors who aren't usually up at that hour pretended to have reasons to walk dogs, and the dogs constantly wanted to go somewhere they shouldn't. Reporters showed up because you can't keep something like this quiet. Not when flashing lights paint everything. One asked me if I had a statement, and I laughed in their face because it was that, or scream. Bill from down the block stood in his yard with his fishing hat clutched to his chest like a shield. And when I looked at him, I could see in his eyes he was thinking of the collar I'd given him. And he was doing the math backward on whether he should have knocked on Daniel's door and demanded answers a week prior. And the answer to that math is always cruel, because it doesn't care that you couldn't know. I thought they might take Leah away immediately, because that's what happens in stories. But they didn't. They let her sit in my living room and drink water slowly, like she'd been asked to sip truth out of a cup. She didn't say much. In moments when the EMT moved to the kitchen for something, she'd lift the edge of the blanket and look down her own legs, like she was checking she was still there. At one point, she looked at me and said in a very small voice, "He kept it all neat, like it was a library." I nodded, not because I understood, but because nodding is what you do when someone lets you see their worst. I asked her, "How long were you?" She shook her head and shut her eyes, and I swallowed the question. We sat there a while like that, listening to strangers in blue shoe covers move through next door, listening to radios buzz and click like nocturnal insects. Time didn't move correctly. It just lay there, waiting. Later, after the sun was up high enough to make the cops squint, and the reporters try to find angles that didn't blow out skin tones, an officer asked if I wanted to step inside next door to identify anything. Not for a lineup. Not to identify something I owned. To see if there was anything that connected to the knocks, the sound, the smells. I didn't want to. I did it anyway. Because my whole life I've been the idiot who thinks looking a thing in the face is how you make it smaller. Daniel's house looked like a catalog. Not an expensive one, just a clean one. No piles, no dust. The only clutter was in the basement, and even that was tidy like a surgeon's drawer. In the kitchen, under the sink, there were 3 bottles of bleach, 2 different brands of the same industrial disinfectant, and a row of sponges lined up like dominoes. The fridge was mostly empty, except for clear containers with clear liquid and a jar with a paintbrush in it. The labels on the containers had dates, and those dates meant nothing to me, except that people who put dates on things expect to remember something later. The bathroom smelled like the memory of a pool. The bedroom had the most unsettling thing in it, and it wasn't a weapon. It was a notebook on the nightstand, no name, with neat lists of words. Some were grocery list stuff, bags, tape, solvent. Some were things like sawdust and coffee grounds and onion skins. Under those tiny check marks, I could see the work of hiding in ink. In the basement, I made it only to the bottom step. Maybe you think you want details. I thought I did. But details are sticky. They adhere to places in your head they weren't invited. So I'll tell you the clean version, because that's the one I've learned to repeat, the one my therapist says is okay. In the chest freezer were packages wrapped in butcher paper, sealed with plastic twine and duct tape, labeled with numbers and what I think were initials, as if he were cataloging not meat, but the idea of meat from different days. In the wall, a false panel came away easily if you knew where to press. Behind it was a narrow gap where someone had shoved a contractor bag. Inside that bag, well, the officer told me I didn't have to look, and for once I listened. In a crawl space under the stairs, a milk crate had been slid into a hole, and inside was a collection of things that used to belong to people. Rings, a phone case with a sticker of a cartoon fish, a hair tie, a small silver necklace with a letter charm that made my stomach flip, because Leah's name started with that letter. There were other hiding places. Inside a ventilation return behind a screwed-on grill. Under the bottom shelf of a built-in that was actually just a flimsy board lifted to reveal space. Inside a ceramic planter that had no plant in it, just a lid of dirt to hide the shape. Everywhere you can hide, someone can think to hide something worse. The officers treated it all like a bomb that might go off if they were clumsy. They talked quietly as if words could jostle the wrong molecules. The female officer from before stood near me like a tether. "You don't have to be here," she said again, and in her voice was permission, not impatience. I told her I needed to see enough to believe it. She nodded like it wasn't the first time someone had said that to her. When I turned to go, I put my hand on the door jamb and felt a nick in the wood where someone had been careless with a lock once. Not important. My brain clung to it anyway, a splinter I could hold. After Daniel was actually cuffed, After some legal mess, I'm not going to pretend to understand about searching and probable cause and who called who. He finally spoke within earshot of me. He wasn't yelling. He said in that calm voice that sounded like he was always deciding whether to nod yes or no, "None of it is yours." He said it to the officer, but he looked straight at me when he said it. It took a beat for me to parse what he meant, and then I wanted to throw up because it sounded like a courtesy, like he was telling me none of the things he kept belonged to anyone I knew, like I should feel better. That's when my hands started to shake so hard I had to put them in my pockets to stop everyone from seeing, as if seeing would be worse than anything else. People will ask, like you want me to, how long he'd been doing it, where he took people from, why he picked what he picked, if he had a pattern, if he had a reason, if it was random, if he liked to watch, if there were signs. You want a rule so you can feel safe. You want me to say, he only grabbed people at night, so you can feel okay in the day, or that he only went for a certain look so you can feel okay in your skin. I don't have those answers. Even the police didn't, for a while, not in a clean line. I know there were dates on the packages. I know some of those dates were months back, older than copper. I know there were labels that only made sense to him. I know Leah told them there were others, plural. I know the officers kept their faces very still when they opened the freezer. Very, very still. In the days after, I didn't sleep, and then slept for 16 hours at a stretch on weird days, like my body didn't care about the clock anymore. People I barely met came up the steps with casseroles. This is maybe the most surreal thing about being near something awful. People want to show love to someone, and if they can't reach the center, they put their hands on the next circle out. I ate lasagna at noon and potato salad at 2 a.m. The police came back with more questions. Leah left in an ambulance, then came back for her things, then vanished into the system that handles people who've been unhaunted from someone else's house and have to figure out what that means. She hugged me once in the doorway, and it felt like hugging a ghost and a solid person at the same time. I said, "I'm glad you knocked on my door." And she said, "Me too." And neither of us said the thing that sat fat between us. What if I'd not answered? What if I'd cracked it too slow? What if he had listened 1 second longer? A week after everything, I found a scratch on my back door I hadn't noticed. 3 scrapes angled like someone with short nails had dragged them down the wood by accident. Not deep, not dramatic. I ran my finger over them gently and felt a little rise in the paint. You could put a whole book in those scratches if you want to. The mind does that when it's given small evidence. It expands it to fit the container you need. I saw those scratches and thought of the soft knock, and the whisper, and the wet hair, and Daniel's ear pressed to my door like he was trying to figure out how to become the wood. The landlord asked if I wanted to move. He said it with a kindness I hadn't heard from him when I moved in. "People will understand," he said. "It's not just your run-of-the-mill noisy neighbor. You don't have to take it like a champ." I said I'd think about it, because money doesn't care about trauma. In the end, I stayed for longer than anyone sane would, because inertia is powerful, and this was my place, and some angry part of me didn't want him to get my house too. It wasn't rational. I didn't want to explain to a new person why my couch had a little tear in it, from where my keys snagged the night I ran to the front. I didn't want to explain anything again. Daniel's house was sealed for a while. It sat there under police tape like a mouth with a yellow smile. Then men in paper suits came and went for a few days. Then there was a dumpster. I watched people in nice clothes and expensive cars drive slowly down our street, gawk, whisper, take photos, as if this was a museum of bad things where you can see without being seen. I stood on my porch and drank my coffee and stared back. I met their eyes. Some of them looked away fast. Some of them didn't, and those were the ones who irritated me most. Their eyes said, "We'd like you to perform. Tell us your story. We need to feel the right kind of close to it." I went back inside and shut the door exactly the same way I had shut it that night when I let Leah in. Soft, careful, like a lid on a box. Eventually the tape came down, and the landlord, who also happened to be Daniel's landlord, told me in a voice that was way too upbeat that the place would be gutted and redone. "Fresh start," he said, like he was selling a candle. He offered to knock some money off my rent if I agreed to stay through the renovation noise. The idea of listening to saws and hammers in that house made bile rise in my throat. I said no, and didn't care if it made me sound ungrateful. He nodded like he understood, and then asked if I could recommend any friends who might want the place in a couple months. I laughed by accident because sometimes your body just refuses to be polite. Here's the part no one wants to hear. It doesn't end clean. There isn't a point where you sit up and go, "Whew, glad that's over," and then live the same life. That's not how houses or brains work. The house keeps its dents. The brain certainly does. The saw sounds are still in my wall somewhere, damped down by time. Sometimes when the ice maker in my fridge dumps, I whip around so fast I scare myself. Sometimes when I wash a plate, the smell catches me, and I have to hold the counter with both hands and breathe through my mouth and tell myself out loud, "It's dish soap. It's dish soap." When a package shows up on my porch with the wrong address, I leave it there and call the number on the label and make them come get it. I don't touch it. I don't put it just inside the door. The line of the door is a hard line for me now. I understand lines. I got a second camera. I put one in the back window too, despite not wanting to look. I forced myself to check the footage every morning for a while. Most mornings it was nothing. Sometimes it was raccoons doing crimes. For 3 nights in a row, it was Bill smoking on his steps at 3 a.m. And we both pretended later we hadn't seen each other when we waved at breakfast time. Once it was a fox with a rabbit in its mouth, and I stood at my sink and thought, "Everyone has to eat." Which is not a very comforting sentence, but it was the one that came. I kept the cop's card on the fridge longer than necessary, until the magnet failed, and it slid to the floor like a curtain dropping after a play no one wants to clap for. People will ask me if I hate Daniel. It's such a simple word. I don't know what it is I feel. Hate seems too active, like something that would burn me from the inside trying to do a job for him. Mostly it's emptier than that. It's like there's a blank spot in the air across the driveway, an absence that has weight. And I make a wide circle around it like a dog who won't walk on a certain part of the kitchen tile. I can pass by his old door now and not feel like I'm going to throw up. I can sleep with my window open on nights when the wind's from the right direction. Progress is weird. It comes in measurements like that. How wide you open a window, whether you let a towel hang instead of folding it so the edge is neat. The only time I let myself think about the freezer, about the labeled packages, about what it means to put a label on a lamb chop of a person, is when Leah calls me. She does sometimes, not often. just enough that I know she's there being alive in the world. We don't talk about him. We talk about dumb things. She tells me her neighbor in the new place she's in leaves their laundry in the washer like they're trying to grow a new species of towel, and we complain about that. She tells me she likes mint gum now and used to hate it. She tells me she sleeps with socks on. I tell her I moved the couch and my living room looks bigger, and that the grocery store I go to stopped carrying the good pickles. She laughs in a way that has regained some structure. Once, we both were quiet for a long time, and then she said, "When you opened the door, it made a sound. That little sigh. I think about it all the time. I think about it because it means you opened it." "I did," I said, and my voice cracked the tiniest bit, and I let it. There are still nights I wake up because a dream's rhythm synced to a sound outside. I lie there, and my breathing tries to match it, and then refuses to. Those nights, I get up and make tea and stand at the back window and look at the dark yard like it's a painting of yard. I remember the woman under my porch light, edges blurred by rain, and how humans are not actually made of glass, even when they look like they could slip through your hands. I remind myself of dumb things that I now believe in, like their prayers, locks that click, doors that are just wood and metal, and yet can stand between a you and a him, voices on radios that sound bored and careful and come when you ask, people who will wrap you in shiny blankets that rustle like candy, and will wait with you while your body catches up to the news your brain got earlier, the lowest truths. One afternoon not long ago, a new couple moved into Daniel's old place. Young, like movie young. They had a potted fig tree and a bar cart and a dog that looks like it came with the apartment. I stood on my porch with a coffee cup and made friendly neighbor eyes at them, because I am, against all evidence, someone who still believes in neighbor eyes. The guy introduced himself and immediately offered to help me fix my porch swing. I said, "Maybe," in that tentative way I have now, because letting people into your yard feels like letting them into your lungs. He made a joke about how the place had a lot of history, and then said he didn't want to know anything. I said, "That's probably smart." They asked if the trash pickup is early or late here. I said early and watched their faces do that little math that new residents do. Later I watched them roll out their can. No tape on the lid. The sight of that was so ridiculous and so normal that I cried for 5 minutes in my kitchen by the sink, where the drain smells are all mine now. Then I laughed at myself, because crying at a garbage can lid is maybe the most on-brand thing I could do after all this. People expect the gruesome things to stick. It's the small ones that grab your ankles when you walk past. I tell this so you know what your head can live with and still keep your own voice. I tell this so if someone knocks on your door gently and says, "Please," your instinct to straighten your house before letting a stranger in loses the fight just once. I tell it because the cops did, in the end, find parts and limbs and whole offal, whereas the rest of you truths all across his house, tucked the way you tuck away things you want to keep and don't want anyone else to find. They found them in freezers and walls and boxes, in pipes and under stairs, in vent grills and planters, and places I still find in my house at night when the dark moves wrong. I didn't go looking. I didn't need to. It was enough to see the faces of the people who did, enough to feel the stairs under my feet and know we're all just one door closing, one door opening, away from being inside or outside. And here's the last thing, the one I don't say out loud when family asks, because they do, because people are terrible and wonderful and nosy. The last thing is that I keep thinking of how he said, None of it is yours. The way he meant it to comfort, the way it didn't, the way, in a sideways, accidental way, it's also true. None of it is mine to carry if I can help it. I carry what I can. The rest I let be evidence. I let it live in boxes with dates on them in someone else's files. I keep the door closed, but I don't nail it shut. And when the wind is good, I open my kitchen window again. And if the air smells like pennies, I laugh and say, out loud, because it helps, it's the sink trap. And then I settle the drain down with boiling vinegar and a stupid, stubborn faith that the smallest true things will hold.